Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming today out in the rain. We're starting a new Sefer. I personally think, I know I always say Bereshit is my favorite, but there is a lot to learn from Sefer Debarim. It is part of the Chamisha Chumsheh, part of the 5 books of the Mosaic books, but at the same time, it has its own identity. It seems to be completely of a different genre. And the reason I say that is because all the other 4 books, Vaidaber Hashem, Hashem is doing the speaking, Moshe is speaking the words that God gives him. God is speaking through him. But when we encounter Sefer Devarim, we see a new dynamic. We see a completely new situation. And here it seems, and I'm using the term Moshe, but maybe a better terminology would be humanity. And what I mean by that, just mute everybody, I'm sorry. Hold on, it's going to be at the beginning because yours is a Sefer Devarim. Sorry, guys. When I say Moshe is speaking, I really mean that the Torah here is giving a license for every one of us to find our own voice, our own ability to express ourselves. This is not just about Moshe. That's what the whole class is going to be about. That. So Amy is saying the importance of speaking the right way. Devarim, let's go back a minute. The word devarim, ele hadivarim, could be these are the things, but it's rooted in the word dibur, which means speech. And if we just look at the beginning where the Torah starts out, ele hadivarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael בעבר הירדן, במדבר, בערבה, מול סוף, בין פרן ובין תופל ולבן וחצרות ודי זהב. It sounds like a very long run-on sentence. What I want you to acknowledge or appreciate is that in this Sefer, there are books here, that in this Sefer, it seems as if Moshe is speaking from his own heart and his own mind. Because it doesn't say that these are the words that God had told Moshe to say, and the content and the monologue that he's going to deliver doesn't seem to be very prophetic at first. It seems it's known Deuteronomy is another word for Devarim, duo. It's in Hebrew, they refer to it as Mishneh Torah, the second addendum to the Torah, everything that God said in the first 4 books. And this is the second, like volume 2. We don't see it that way. That's the English translation of Devarim, which is Deuteronomy. They say this is Mishneh Torah. It's as important as Torah itself. It's a secondary Torah that seems to be dictated by Moshe. And we're going to, I just only read one quick pasuk and I only read it in Hebrew, but I wanted to give you a sense that it doesn't seem like anything earth-shattering is happening. So it seems like these are the words that Moshe spoke to Bnei Israel when they were positioned in this place, and then they give us the coordinates of that place. And we're not preparing ourselves for any earth-shattering information. But if we look a little closely, we'll see, I think this is one of the most earth-shattering things that we today will find in Torah, Sefer Devarim, that man could be placed on the same level, so to speak, that just as God spoke to man, now man is speaking from within himself. I'll give you a little bit of a visual. Up until now, you could picture that all of expression coming into the world, starting from Sefer Bereshit and the laws, which way were they coming? They were coming from above to below. It was a vertical transference of information. It was a way to observe something or to understand or absorb and observe from above to below. So things that penetrated us came in this direction. And all of a sudden, Sefer Devarim comes along. You could picture like an electricity chart, and they take the original flow that comes of energy, and what happens to that energy? It now starts to route itself this way, horizontally. The excitement of that is that Sefer Devarim is saying, don't view God in this world as only a force that comes vertically from above to below, but that same energy, once it is harnessed, once it is channeled, what does the human being have the ability to do? We are conduits. This is a very exciting concept that Moshe is now depicting, that conduit idea, and taking the flow and taking what he received. This is not, I'll say for those of you who just walked in, this is not just about Moshe. This is intended for every one of us to really understand our capabilities and how God created us. And so as conduits, Moshe is showing, yes, Moshe kibel Torah misinai, Moshe received, but what happens once he absorbed and observed? Now he is spreading it out. And this horizontal, this idea of human to human transmission is going to be relatively new, but what's most exciting about it is that Moshe now has a job. Because it's one thing to be the absorber, it's a completely another skill to be the one who is going to process and spread that information. We too are going to have that responsibility. One is lilmod and one is lilamed. To learn is an internal skill. And then you can't just have one. And this is why Sefer Devarim is so important, because you can't just take in, you can't just harness the energy. It also is going to be a responsibility to spread it out. That's in a nutshell. You wanted to say something?
No.
Oh,
Does it have anything to do with the fact that Moshe is not going to get into Israel, that he has to feel like he has to do something a little channel his way is a little different, or does it have to do with us? Are we closer to Hashem because we've been in the desert for 40 years?
it's a beautiful question. So for our Zoom community, Sonia is asking a question and she's saying, is this coming from a place of Moshe feeling maybe that this is his last opportunity to transmit to the people because he's not going to continue with them on their journey? That was the first part of your question. And then you asked the second part of the question, which was, or
are we just being that we're there 40 years, we're closer, we're ready to be.
Or is it that this generation, which is this new dor, which is not the generation that Moshe is speaking about, does the place that the new generation is in have something to do with this new dynamic? And my answer is going to be both. Why do I say that? You bring up a few good points. I should have said in the introduction that what's so interesting when we read Sefer Devarim is that Moshe is speaking to the current generation, which is the generation that was born in the desert. These people coming into the land are not the people that came out of Egypt. They were either babies or they were born in the desert. So he's speaking to a group of people that he should be speaking to in the third person. He should say, and they complained, and they wanted water, and they're spies. And instead, what does he do? He speaks to the current generation, which wasn't involved with those 40-year ago disasters. He speaks to them as if they were included in the events. There's so much beauty in everything we're going to see in Sefer Devarim. One of the beautiful ideas of this type of presentation is that Moshe is saying, they may have done all of those things back then, but their bodies are not ever lost and forgotten in the desert. We're bringing them into the land with us. It's a process. And the process is we needed to go through that so that we could get here. There's no such thing as leapfrogging from Egypt straight into Eretz Yisrael. And the painful process that we went through to get here, we're not going to amputate and sever that part of our history. We're going to include them. I'm going to speak to you through them and with them because they're coming with us. And why do I say that? Why am I so convicted about that? Because when we left Egypt, do you remember what Moshe took with him? The bones of Yosef. Every generation has to take its past with them into their future. We can't plant a future without the seeds of the past. We need to bring Yosef. And the words for Yosef are Atzmot Yosef, not just his bones, but his essence. And when we bring the essence of the past, and what was Yosef's essence all about? Taking care of his brothers, wanting to be part of the family, wanting to get, what was his dying wish? Please take me to the land. So his essence embodied wanting to be in the land of Israel, together in peace with his brothers. That's all he wanted. He cries and cries in Sefer Bereshit. You won't see anybody crying as much as Yosef does. And he cries over brotherhood. And he says that's the one thing he wants to claim in his lifetime. And in his lifetime, he doesn't really get there. Till on his dying bed, his brothers are still skeptical of whether or not he's going to be magnanimous as he had been with them. And what we end up seeing is that what Yosef couldn't achieve in his lifetime, his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren are going to bring to fruition. And so when we bring past the generations into our future, we recognize that we weren't, there's a saying that say he was born on third and thinks he hit a triple. We weren't born on, we didn't hit a triple. The only way we got to third base is because somebody else did the hard work to get us here. And when we go from third base to home plate and we score, we're part of a team. We didn't do that alone. There was a pitcher, there was a hitter, there was a coach, there was a lot of things had to happen. And here we are. To answer Sonia's question, yes, we are on the precipice of coming into the land. Where are we? Just besides geographically speaking, which the Torah lays out in the first verse, where are we time-wise? This is our space. Our time, the whole span of the whole Sefer is under 1 month, is less than 1 month. This is it. This is, we're coming in for a landing. We're about to cross into the Jordan. And yes, to answer your question, Moshe, these are his parting words to the people. What can I tell you from my experience? I didn't go to the top of the mountain and spend 40 days with God there for nothing. I didn't just go there for my own sake. I need to, I must, and I'll keep shifting it. What Moshe is saying, every one of us has to say to our next generations, to the next generation that's going to have its own frontier to cross, and has to share the wisdom that they absorbed and that they brought in and say, hey, let me tell you something. And this is what Moshe is going to tell us. Now, Excuse me. Now, somebody here said something before about how to speak to the people. So what's so ironic about Sefer Devarim, I say it all the time, even when it's not Sefer Devarim, is that the man who was called to action in his interview with God, who told him, go speak to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. What does he say when he's called for duty? I'm out. You have the wrong guy. I love you, God. I don't know what you're thinking. You need a spokesman. You need somebody who could speak. And you know the words that he uses? You know what he says? He says, Lo ish devarim anochi. I don't know, God, what your selection process was, but it's flawed because you're asking a person who can't speak, who's not a man of devarim, to go and accomplish your mission. That's not me. Lo mitmol, lo mishilshom, not from yesterday, not even from the day before. There's a midrash that says that he had a speech impediment. It could actually be that he had a physical speech impediment. It also could be that he had a difficulty expressing himself. And if you wanted to take him to a therapist, the therapist might say it's not physical. He can speak, but just maybe because he was never able to say who he was, what his identity was, that he's really a Jew and he's growing up in the palace. Maybe again, I'm not psychoanalyzing him, but just wondering if it's possible that because he could never say who he actually was, he learned to just keep his mouth. I know people that today that lived in Egypt, that lived in countries, and they were not allowed to say that they were Jewish. Their parents sent them to school. My mother's raising her hand. The parents sent them to school and said, whatever you do, don't tell them you're Jewish. And very often what happens is that you're inculcated with a sense of keeping silence. And then when it comes time to express yourself and you've never opened up, your training, it's a muscle memory where your mind says, anything you say will be used against you. Don't say anything. So I really haven't used my expression muscle in so many years. So whether it was a physical, or you want to go with the midrash that they gave him coal and gold and he was reaching for the gold because he was smart.
Some people are able to talk more than others and be more.
Some people have the gift of gab. I'm not going to say no. Some people have that gift. And what I'm going to answer to that is Sefer Devarim is a testimony for every single one of us. The very thing that you think is your weakness, if you work on it, could become your greatest strength. So don't ever say to yourself, that's not for me. I can't do that. Maybe if you tried, and maybe if you put your mind to something, I know people in their 80s who have taken on, go to colleges, you'll see those old people sitting in the back. And those people say, what? I think I can. Let me try. I don't know that I can't. Let me try. Until somebody tells me otherwise, I'm going to try.
Excuse me, Vivien, but Moshe was associated with Netzach. So maybe he's saying, I'm not a man of words, I'm a man of action. Because he kills the Mitzri, he admonishes the Jews that are beating. So maybe he's just saying, I'm not words, I'm action, because he's Netzach.
I love that. That happens to be beautiful. I think God's not so happy with him because he needs to not just speak, but take action. He needs to physically present himself. And Grace is saying that not only does he have to speak in front of Pharaoh, It's a public speaking, which they say, right? What do they say about public speaking? They say that the fear of public speaking, you've heard this, is greater than the fear of death. That they took a survey, and that's how many people are afraid of speaking in public. They go further and they say they'd rather be the guy in the box than the guy speaking. But it's just an analogy to show that, yeah, maybe he was afraid of speaking, but you know what the Sefer is really telling us? You know what it's really saying, and we don't want to hear it? It's saying, stop it already. Stop it already. Why? Their excuse, not just to Moshe. This is, again, so easy when we say, oh, Moshe, he had his insecurities, he had a hard life, he couldn't. The Torah is telling us something else. When God says, I'm standing in your corner, and I'm right here alongside you. Let me just read this, hold on. When God is saying, I am standing in your corner, which he's telling us he is. We'll go through Pesukim upon Pesukim. God's telling us, how many times do we have to read that I will be with you, I will guard you, I will protect you, your enemies will have no power over you. God tells us all of these things. The question is, and the challenge is, to what degree do we believe that what God is saying, we could take that to the bank? Do we really internalize it? Do we really believe that God is standing on our side? I'll give you a couple examples. The Maccabim, those few people against the many, what do we need to do? We need to study the stories of how many times we beat the odds. And we've beat the odds. Let's go to modern day Israel. What am I taking you to Hanukkah? Why don't I take you to the 6-Day War? Why don't we go see our own last year? An Iron Dome, for goodness sakes. Who puts in the mind of man the inspiration to be able to create a contraption, a shield, an invisible shield in the sky? If that's not God himself impersonated saying, I am your shield. So you may not see me physically as your shield, so I'm going to give you Ruach HaKodesh, and I'm calling inspiration, Ruach, spirit that is holy, so that you could defend yourself. Now, if you see the shield as a bunch of people sitting in front of computers, knocking down missiles like a, what do they call those games that the kids play, those like a Tetris, or I don't know what it's called, those games. If you see it as that, I feel sorry for you, says God. It's another opportunity for you to see my presence in the world today. This book is not an ancient sefer that happened back then, and it's no longer ongoing. And we are 2,000 generations removed, but you know what we are? We're still conduits of that energy. We still have that responsibility,
I
Sonia.
know it just worked out this year, but does it have anything to do with that? We read it right around to Shabbat.
Always. No, always.
So we know that, it's the same thing what you said. Tisha B'Av happened, but we got to move on. So
Sonia's asking a beautiful question. Okay, great. So Rena, right?
Yeah.
Rena and Sonia both asking the same question. It happens to be that this year, right, we bunched together Matot and Mas'eh. We could have bunched together Vayakhel and Pekudeh, or two other ones. We ended up with an extra Parashat because the last Saturday of Pesach, we were still reading the reading of Pesach. This wasn't because of a leap year issue. It happened to be that the last day of Pesach, was it a Saturday?
The 8th day.
The 8th day was a Saturday. So we in America read the reading for Pesach, and we missed the parasha that they were reading in Israel. And now we had to catch up with them. And I asked, actually, my friend Katie's husband, Joey Hidary, I said, how do they decide which perakim to do it? You could have done, there are other ones that match together nicely, right? And he said exactly what Sonia's bringing. We make sure that we catch up so that we read Sefer Debarim. We open Sefer Debarim and we read the Haftarah, which is Chazon Yeshayahu, which is the vision that Yeshayahu sees. That needs to be read on the Shabbat before or of Tisha B'Av. And so, yes, I don't think there's any coincidences. I think the rabbis were genius in their planning. We live Torah. And living Torah means when we read this, it's not about them back then, it's about us today. And us today reading this is going to take us on a completely different journey. So I want to take you now, just because it was a longer introduction than I had expected, but I'll say a couple of things. I want you to notice in the first pasuk, Ele hadevarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. At this point, Bnei Israel is what? Intact, kol Yisrael, united on a high spiritual level, because when they're not kol Yisrael, what are they called? Ha'am, just the nation, a nameless multitude of people. So at this point in our journey, we've become whole again. Yes, we lost people along the way. And yes, we had our fair share of trials and tribulations. But ultimately, right now, and maybe Sonia's speaking to this, yes, we lost a temple this week. We lost so much. But what is God's promise? As long as you decide to be Kol Yisrael, as long as you decide that you want to pick up the pieces and you want to renew and reestablish, I'm going to be standing right there to make sure that that happens. And from the time this was written till today, how many times were we this close to extinction? Her theme is the Pintala Yid. She taught it to me and I never forgot it. What does Pintala Yid mean? The little spark inside the Jewish person. Every Jewish person is and has a spark. And all you need is one little Jew to ignite an entire world, an entire generation. And every one of us has to see ourselves as that little pach shemen, as that little cruse of oil that they found after the temple was destroyed. Every single one of us has enough oil inside of us to ignite our entire, not just family or community, our entire nation. And this is what God is telling us here. So here Moshe is that Pintala Yid. Here Moshe is that spark that's going to ignite from all the way back on the mountain. He's going to start the ball rolling. And what's our job? We have to keep that flame alive. So when it says Kol Yisrael, we should also realize the idea of kol, of an entirety, means a lot of things. I started to say it means not just a vertical, but also a horizontal. I've spoken in the past about the Vitruvian man, the perfect man, scientific, is the same exact dimensions from his head to his toes as from fingertip to fingertip. And so when we say Kol Yisrael, what's happening here is there's a perfect balance between our spirituality, our spiritual connection to God, and our horizontal connection to each other. This is the balance that we're all looking for. This is a balance that Moshe is finally going to achieve. For so many years, he was just the man of God. That's what it said on his resume, on his office. Moshe, man of God. Here he's becoming what? The man of the people. And this is going to grant him an entire sefer that he is going to author. I want to take you a little further. So what he's telling us is things that we already knew that, and you can see, I want you to see for yourself in verse I should really say verse 2. He says 11 days from Chorev to Har Seir. Oh, there's so much here. I don't know if we have enough time, but it's so beautiful. I don't want to leave it out. What is he calling the mountain? What mountain is Har Chorev? Let's go back. Har Sinai. We got the Torah on Har Chorev. Why am I looking perturbed? Why would you take Har HaElohim, Har, the mountain of God, the with a capital T mountain? Why would you take that mountain and call it what? Har Chorev. She's whispering under her breath. She doesn't want to say it. What are you saying, Sophie? The mountain of destruction, of the Cherev, of the sword. Why are you calling Har Sinai? And who's calling it that? Moshe. He's the one who was up there for 40 days and 40 nights. He knows that mountain like the back of his hand. He knows that mountain better than any one of us ever will know that mountain. So why would he go and call the holy Mount Musa, right? The mountain of Moshe. It's been called many things.
What is it called? Musa?
Musa, Moshe is Musa.
but
Yeah, Har
Musa,
Musa.
they
I'm
call
saying the Arabs, they call it. If
but they call that mountain Musa?
no. The Arabs think that they identified the mountain that's Har Sinai, and they'll call it the mountain of Musa. I'm saying this mountain can go by many names. The choice name for this mountain, the mountain of the sword, is pretty disturbing. I would say Moshe. No, they've called it, but why call it Har Chorev? And what is Moshe trying to say? He's saying, I finally understand. And there are commentaries that will say, oh, God held the mountain over them and said, if you don't accept my laws, remember, Har Kegitit, I'm going to throw the mountain on you. We said, okay, we'll keep the mitzvot. And that's how, I'm not going there. It's a midrash, and it's a way for us to understand that we may not have, or what human would want to take so many restrictions upon themselves willingly. There's all kinds of things that surround the midrash that they want to make those points. I'm just going to go the simplest route ever. It's what I know. Where do we first see a cherev? You know where we see a cherev for the first time? Come on, my happy place. In Gan Eden. Where do we see a sword? You know that ever turning, the flaming sword that's ever turning, the cherev hamitapechet. What is that? I'm glad you're making that confused look on your face. When we left, when Adam, I'll change it to humanity. When the human species was thrown out of Gan Eden, what did God do? He put keruvim, cherubs, and he put this ever-turning sword to guard the path to Etz HaChaim, the tree of life. What is Moshe saying? You misunderstood the whole Har Sinai experience. You were so busy being scared. It was as if you saw a sword. It was as if you thought you were going to die, because remember they said, Moshe, you speak to us. Otherwise, we might die. What were you, the very thing, goes back to the speech, the very thing you were most afraid of was the greatest gift that you could have accepted, which was what? That mountain was your entryway back to Etz HaChaim. That sword that you saw was just there to remind you of the sword that's in Gan Eden, blocking the way to the tree of life. And God was saying, what? I am going to revert and reverse back to a place and time where you could go through the sword and come to where? To an idyllic existence, to a reality that once existed, to a place that is equal to where Adam Harishon was in Gan Eden. Har Chorev, that was our place. That's where God's Shekhinah was. What are the kerubim? the cherubim, the cherubs, the angelic figures that were in Gan Eden are currently or were subsequently where? Over the Aron, right? Those two cherubs guarding what? What was right above them? God's presence. God's presence. And what's inside the Aron? Just remind me. The luchot, the tablets from Har Sinai, that whole Aron that you see with the cherubs and God's Shekhinah on top of the box that's holding the tablets is a mini Har Sinai. It's a Har Sinai revisited. It's a portable Har Sinai. And when I say portable, it means that it's something that travels with us wherever we go, if we so choose to absorb it, if we so choose to recognize it. If we don't see Sinai as, if we don't see the cherev of Har Chorev as an invitation to come back to a pristine, idyllic existence, then we miss the whole point. And that's what Moshe is saying. He's saying that generation, they saw Sinai, and what did they see? They didn't see the lightning and the fire and the audio visual greatest show on earth. You know what they saw? They saw the cherev. They saw the sword. Just like Bil'am. Does he see the angel or does he see the sword? It's our question we ask ourselves. Am I going to focus on the fear or am I going to hang on to the faith? Which one?
Vivien, can I
Yes.
ask you, I'm sorry, I just want to ask you, what do we need the cherubim for?
It's
The
not,
cherubim.
you're asking a need. It's not a question of need. It's an instruction from God to Moshe to build above his tablets, I believe, a representation or a replica of Etz HaChaim in the Garden of Eden, because those cheruvim were guarding. And what do we say about Torah? Etz Chaim hi lamachazikim ba. It's our life force. We spoke earlier about energy and conduits and being able to absorb and being able to take in. If we were learning a Kabbalah class, this would be 101. Kabbalah, lekabel, to receive the energies. So those cheruvim, Sarah, were there to depict, to have a physical representation of what it's going to take to go back to a place where man and God are in close communication and in sync once again. And there is a whole story that I'm not going to get into today with the cheruvim, but if you ever want to study them, when they were facing each other,
Yeah.
it meant that the people were at peace. When they were looking away from each other, it meant that they weren't, or that God wasn't okay with us. All of these things are something definitely to be studied, but they're not part of the scope of today's lesson. So I want to bring us back here today. And Amy said something very important in the beginning of class when we said Debarim. And we said that Moshe now has to, or has gained the art or the ability to be able to express himself. He makes a statement. It's very, very subtle, and I want you to see it in your Humashim. If you'll turn the page to verse 12, and because Sonia mentioned the, it's going to be on this, on that same first chapter. Page 6. It's, yeah, I'm in a different book than you, that's why. So it's page 6. For those of you in Devarim Perek Aleph, I want you to see verse 12. Echa. That's for Sonia. There's a connection right there. Echa esa levadi. What is Moshe saying? This is part of his soliloquy. How am I supposed to carry these people alone? God, I only have 2 shoulders. These people are not an easy bunch, to say the least. So he says, how can I carry their contentions, their burdens, their quarrels, all of their problems that they bring with them. The Echa question, right? And then we ask the question, Echa, how is it possible that this generation that saw so many miracles and so much salvation, how is it possible that they turned in to these people? And then thank you. The way we have to read it is say, what is our generation? What do we look like? What does the assimilation rate look like? What does the faith level look like? And it's a question, it's an echa. How did we get to this place? So that word I think is definitely here because it's meant to be read this week with Megillat Echa. But also he answered, verse 14 is you answered and said, oh no, I'm sorry. Havu, and the answer was, get for yourself people, and I want you to notice the three types of, actually four, because anashim is a prerequisite. You have to be an ish. You have to be a person of import, and import means importance in the eyes of others. You have to hold yourself and be respected, so to speak. So we'll call anashim one category. And chachamim, and nevonim, and yeduim. If you ever wanted to know what Chabad, you know, the Chabadniks, what Chabad stands for, it's an acronym for Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at.
Wow.
It's these three words right here. So that's something that they aspire to. And why do they use the acronym for these three words? Because Moshe is saying, if you want to be able to lead, if you want to be a mentor to the people, you need to possess these things, Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. And that sounds very beautiful, but there's an aberration in the text, and we get a little bit of a stomachache when we read it. Because when we go down to verse 15, what was on the job description was Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. But instead, what did he get? He got Anashim that were Chachamim and Yeduim. They missing Bina.
What's Bina exactly?
What's Bina exactly? That's probably the greatest question we could ask today. So if Chokhmah is wisdom or knowledge, and Yedi'ah is either, you could use it as knowledge because that's a good way. It's also a person whose yadua is also endeared. There's something very well known and endeared, liked. Something that you would want to attach yourself to is something that's more yadua. They use that terminology biblically to mean, you know, when a husband and wife yada et ishto, there's some kind of an attachment that's an intimate knowledge, let's call that. But what is Bina? And what is Moshe telling us? And what is this week's message from Parashat Debarim? Is that in order to be a mentor, in order to be somebody who's going to guide and lead the people, and again, I'm not saying a lofty elected head of state. I'm saying every single one of us here, you're leading your family, you're a leader amongst your friends. How are we going to really cultivate that which Moshe is aspiring to, that which he wanted? He wanted this thing called Bina. And I think the idea of a navon, I'll go simplest if you want to use Rashi's explanation. He says that a navon is mevin davar mitoch davar. He understands one thing from another. In today's terminology, we might say he uses as his form of reasoning, he uses deduction. He's going to deduce one thing from another. But to be a navon, says Moshe, in order to be able to understand the human psyche and how the mind thinks, that is, by the way, a prerequisite for being able to be a therapist, a mentor, a teacher. And what does it mean to understand the human psyche? What is this thing called Bina? So I'll say a few things. A person who has Binah is able to literally take a quantum leap. He's able to go from the finite to the infinite. I'll say it in a different way. When a person is standing in front of you, you want to be able to, and now this is where all those words, sympathy, empathy, compassion, pity, and if you go online, you'll just get, I made myself a whole flow chart and then everything started to double up. I went here, I went there, and then I said, I'm not even gonna go there. You could, again, because they're English words that are meant to describe a certain emotional, mental, psychological state. And not everybody's going to interpret them the same way. So I sort of was keeping away from the difference. I spent hours looking up the difference between sympathy and empathy and compassion and pity and all of those words. For today, according to the Torah, the most organic understanding of what Binah is I think having the ability to deduce and to induce. I'll describe the differences. So
like the street smarts almost.
there's going to be a street smart component. There's going to be a street smart component. And I think when you say street smart, it's experience that you gain and glean from experience, right? It's knowledge that you gain from experience, if that's how you're referring to street smarts. So just to give you a scientific definition of deducing, theories and reasoning based on patterns and observations. And what is that? It's reason, it's using logic, it's using analysis, but at the end of the day for us today, it's taking information from the outside and bringing it in. Hold on a minute. The other thing, which is induction, is really not such a perfect science, and it doesn't always work out. It's not always accurate, because when you induce something, you're inferring something, and you're taking the inside and bringing it out. You're taking something very specific and you're generalizing it. For instance, if you see a person that has muscles, you might say that that person is a very strong person. You're taking one thing, then you're saying that anybody who has muscles must be very strong, or whatever it may be. You're taking one small bit of information and you start to generalize it. Moshe is saying, I was looking for nivonim. When I was looking for nivonim, when I was looking for judges, what I was looking for and what I realized is that bringing what's inside out is harder than taking what's outside and putting it in. All this time, Moshe said, I was on the outside trying to do what? Infuse you, trying to have you absorb things, trying to bring things inside of you. And now his swan song. At the end of his life, he recognizes that the things that he brings out from us are more challenging and greater than the things that he just puts into us. This is a groundbreaking concept in psychology or in teaching, because as teachers, we think it's our job to do what? To take the outside and stuff it into you. And I'm going to try and stuff in as much as I can from the outside. I'm going to try and stuff it into you. But what Moshe is going to tell us now is something very different. You want to really be a mentor? The first thing you have to do is go inside, and this is where all those empathy, sympathy words all come into play. I have to wear your shoes. I have to be inside of you. I have to feel your feelings. I have to feel your emotions. I have to feel your pain. In order for me to bring out what's inside of you, what has to happen to me? I have to shrink myself You ever know that book, Miss Frizzle, where she shrinks herself into a capsule and then she like, you go through all the organs. Well, it's great. I don't know. It's called the Yellow Magic School Bus or something. What's it called? Magic School Bus. If you have kids or whatever, it's a very interesting concept that it's, the premise is in order to see the big picture, you actually have to become very, very small. Moshe is telling this to us. Ha'ish Moshe, the biggest man to ever walk the face of the earth, is saying, wow, in order for me to be successful in my job, and they do say he's the Anav Mikol Hadam, he's the one who was able to retract the most and shrink the most. And what he's telling us here is the number one rule of being able to connect to somebody is focusing. You put themselves in your places, one, and now we're going to see other tools that he gives us. Yes, I'm sorry, I held you. What did you say?
I work with a lot of people. You've got to be able to feel people. You've got to know them before whatever it is you have to say. And so I work a lot with Sonia and I work a lot together with people. You got to really feel them. And it's not empathy, it's not sympathy. I don't know what word it is.
Right.
But you've gotta feel
And
them.
then, so she said, so what's being said, I'm just going to repeat it for the Zoomers.
Gotta really absorb them before you
I'm so happy that you're saying that because that's the next part. So
really gotta feel
Rena, right?
Yeah.
Rena is saying, I'm just going to repeat it because they can't always hear. She's saying she does a lot of social work and she works with people. And in order to be effective or successful, you really need to feel them. You really, and she made a gesture of, there has to be a genuine understanding of the person and their emotions. I'm going to add one piece if I might. The people that you're helping need to feel that they are heard and felt and validated, and they need that sync. Sympathy is simpatiko, like a sim. We're together in the pathos. We're together in the emotions. So to have sympathy, just if you want to play with that word, it's saying you can't say that I sympathize with you. It's not words. It's an emotion. It's not a statement. It's a feeling. There's an emotion involved with it. I hear, and this is what Moshe is saying now, my mom's. And they have to trust you. I'm so glad that you're saying that. That's a very big factor. And we know that from teaching. If the student doesn't trust you, sometimes it's the simplest thing that will turn, right? We learned this 100 years ago, that kids, one thing is off. If they don't like your crooked eyeglasses, that's it. They can't focus. They can't focus. Anything about you that they find is a distraction, or they don't trust you, or they don't even like your accent, or how many tour guides have you tried to concentrate on, but you get so lost because they speak in an accent and you're only focusing on their accent and you're not bringing in what they're saying because you're so focused on all of these distractions. So yes, you have to trust them. They have to be felt. You have to speak their language. So Sonia's saying it's also, she's saying what you're saying. It's not a skill. It's not a skill. It's not what you do, but it's who you are. And they will snuff that out. Kids will do it first and foremost. My mother used to say, before you marry somebody, bring them to play with the kids, because the kids have a sense, they know right away. She's serious. Ask my mother.
I like that.
You bring them to be around the kids. She married my father. You see that? You see that? She married my father. Thank God I'm here because of that. But that was a very big prerequisite. And that just broadens into saying that kids have a sense. I'll say it this way, if kids have a sense of who is and isn't trustworthy, it's something innate inside them. They weren't taught that. It's a sense that they have. We as adults have that sense. We may not recognize it right away. Why is it that I'm not relating to that person? We may not realize either we don't trust them, or we don't feel heard, or we don't feel validated, or we don't feel that they share our feelings. We may not identify that that's the reason. We just know that that's not somebody that we want to connect to. And what is Moshe saying? The job is for all of us to be connectors. We want to be able to, to
Why did it
connect
take so
to
long to decide to
generations.
get the elders? Don't you think it took a very long time?
It's interesting that you're saying that, because the elders had to be born. Excuse me. The elders weren't elders. They all died in the desert. So in order to be able to grow and harvest, I'll use that word, harvest elders, they couldn't be the people who were 40, 50, 60 that are now 80, 90, 100. Those people didn't make it. And these people, since you're bringing it up, they're going to be the elders. They're going to be the zekenim. They're going to be the mentors. They're going to be the ones that are going to instruct the next generation. And so, well, yes.
I feel like that's connected to what you taught us last week about him not being able to like receive the bracha because he wasn't trusting.
Yes,
And then we had to
yes,
learn
I'm
that
I'm
trust.
glad that you said that. I put it in my notes, but and then I discarded it. But yes, what's your name?
Surely.
Shirley. So Shirley is saying, in order to be trusting, in order to be able to receive, in order to believe that, then you yourself have to be a trusting person. Because she had said about Yaakov with the beracha, since he was not trustworthy, he lost the ability to trust others or even trust himself. All of this is connected. It's connected so much. I had started to connect it with matot because we said the words that we use, they have so much weight to them. They're so important. Anything we say, we had said about a vow, anything you say has tremendous weight to it. And now Devarim, right? The next chapter, what's Moshe saying? I recognize how much weight words have. I recognize it so much that I recognize that they could build a person and they could break a person. The words that we use, and how does Moshe say that we need to go about doing all of this? So the first thing that they say, like let's just say in therapy, is when a person brings what's in the inside out, a good, capable mentor will be able to see the bigger picture. The client, let's say, will give you a small picture, but you will be able to see what they themselves can't see. I believe in Kabbalah, it's possible they call this the keter. People can't see their own bigger picture, their own crown, that which surrounds them. They're so stuck in their own selves or in the inward vista that they can't see themselves what somebody from the outside could see. And one of the biggest things they say that Moshe is telling us, you want to be a Navon in your generation, then it's your job to see, to bring what's in the inside, to bring it out, and then hold it in front of them and say, this is what I see. I don't see a broken person. I see a person who did get shattered, but let me show you a picture of what you look like whole. I'm not just going to help you to rectify and cope. People have traumas, and you can go to a level, whatever person that's going to help you cope with the trauma, and that's going to help you pick up the pieces. Or, says Moshe, you could actually try to recreate, to renew, to rebuild, to start over, not just survive. A very healthy, focused person will help you thrive. Yes, says Moshe, and he's a perfect example. We lost a whole generation. We could stay stuck ourselves. We could stay stuck in the sand. It's very hard to move forward when you're burying 600,000 men, women, and children that came out of Egypt. I mean, the whole desert was one big graveyard. We don't picture it that way, but it was a big deal. 20,000 here, 10,000 there. We just read the numbers and then we go on with the pasuk. No, there was massive trauma. And we could have done what? Attached ourselves to that and hung on to the grief and hung on to the loss. And Moshe is saying, no, There's something better waiting for you on the other side. Eved lanahar. If you're just willing to do what? Put one foot in front of the other. Just keep walking. You're going to bring them with you. I'm going to bring those people. I'm going to refer to them in first person. I'm going to talk about them as if they're still here. But I'm not going to stay in the place of pain. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to rebuild. And I'm going to show you, says Moshe, what I wanted for you, what I wanted to cultivate was a community of nivonim, of mentors that could actually show you. I'm just going to add one last piece because I know the time is up, but I think it's an important one. There's a beautiful verse in Divrei Hayamim that speaks of Yisachar, and it says, Umibnei Yisachar yod'eh bina le'itim. It's in chapter 12, verse 33 in Divrei Hayamim. It ascribes to the tribe of Yisachar. It says that he is the one that knows Binah, that has this trait, this tribe. And then it adds this word, le'itim. Itim are times, and timing is everything. The mentor also has to know that you could have the best advice in the whole world, but it has to be the right time. And in order to do that, I'll just add you one last piece. If we wanted to play with the idea that it's Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, if we wanted to say, Nisan, yes, Ivan Tammuz. Now, why did I do that? Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Yehuda, I missed Yehuda, that's why. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar. Excuse my numbers, but Yisachar is the fifth son to be born. And if we wanted to correlate him with the fifth month of the year, we would end up in the month of Av. But really the month of Av is ascribed to Shimon because the way that they allocated the months was based on the way they were camping and traveled in the desert. Who's Yisachar's partner? Who would really be ascribed, and I'll end with this, to the month of Av? Shimon. Now, Shimon there are many things that we could say about Shimon Velevi, Achim, and we know that he started out as a very violent person, but I'm going to say something else for today's class, and with this I'll end. I think the Pasuk of Yisachar connects very beautifully to Shimon, because Shimon, he gets his name because God listens. And if you really want to be a Navon, a person who could deduce, who could induce, who could empower, who could help people build, who could help people revive, who could help people thrive, you have to also have the ability to be a listener, to listen. It's not all about the what, me stuffing my information into you, taking all the outside and sticking it into you. It's about you bringing out what you have inside. And by me listening, I allow you to do that. I'll end with a nice little word. And the word is chashmal. The word chashmal, I found it in my searches. I thought it was very nice. It's the Hebrew word for electricity. But if you take the word electricity, chashmal, how do you get a spark? How do you get electricity? How do you empower all of this energy? It's part chash, silence, and part mal, milah. It's a combination of being silent and speaking. My daughter-in-law Simone calls it the power of the pause. Let the person speak. You take a pause, and in that time and in that space, we allow for one thing, and this is what Moshe's real message is to us. In that time and in that space where there's a pause, you ever hear sit in silence with somebody and you never knew what it really meant? It allows for God's voice to speak. It allows for us to hear the unheard. It allows for us to hear within ourselves that inner message, that inner voice, that inner energy that's constantly flowing. That will come from the inside out when we have a lot of these elements. I hope and pray and wish for every one of you in your journey as being mentors and being friends and being parents and being listeners and being instructors, that we're able to find this balance of how much we impose, how much we information we take and try to put in, and how, to what extent we're able to allow the person themselves, to allow the fruits and the plants to grow inside of them, to allow people to regenerate themselves and see their own fruits of their own labors. So I wish you all success in that. I'm just going to make one quick announcement. I'm sorry. Public announcement is, and I don't know where it is. I think it's the JCC. Shoot. Do you know where it is? Is it? So Sunday, Tisha B'Av, God willing, at 11:30 is the time I'm teaching. I'm not 100% sure where it is, but stay tuned. And you could always text me privately if you want to know. And I'm going to try to the best of my ability to Zoom it. I'll bring my computer there. So if those of you who are home want to join, you're more than welcome always.